So a political machine is basically an organization that works to win elections so that it can exercise power. The most famous political machine was New York City's Tammany Hall, which dominated Democratic Party politics in the late 19th century, survived until the 20th, and is keenly associated with corruption. Boss Tweed basically ran New York in the late 1860s and early 1870s, and his greatest feat of swindling helps explain how the machine system worked. It revolved around the then-new county courthouse that now houses the New York City Department of Education. Building the courthouse was initially estimated to cost around $250,000, but ended up costing $13 million by the time it was finished in 1871. The standard kickback in these situations was that Tammany Hall received $2 for every $1 received by the contractor. That may seem like a bad deal for contractors, but remember, that plasterer still got to keep $500,000, which is worth about $9 million in today's money. Now, of course, that makes it sound like political machines were pure evil, especially if you were a taxpayer footing the bill for that courthouse. But machines also provided valuable services to immigrants and other poor people in cities. As Plunkett explained, Tammany could help families in need. In return for this help, Tammany expected votes so that they could stay in power. Staying in power meant control of city jobs as well as city contracts. Plunkett claimed to know every big employer in the district, and in the whole city for that matter, and they ain't in the habit of saying no to me when I ask them for a job. But corruption wasn't limited to big cities like New York and Chicago. Some of the biggest boondoggles involved the United States Congress and the executive branch under President Ulysses Grant. The first big scandal, dubbed the King of Frauds by the New York Sun, involved Credit Mobilier, the construction company that did most of the road building for the Union Pacific Railroad. This two-pronged accusation involved first overcharging the public for construction costs and siphoning off profits to Credit Mobilier, and second, bribery of Congress. The second major scandal involved the so-called Whiskey Ring, which was a group of distillers in St. Louis who decided that they didn't like paying excise taxes on their product, perhaps a slightly more noble cause than that of the 2009 Bling Ring, who just wanted to dress like Paris Hilton. John McDonald, a Grant administration official, helped distillers reduce their taxes by intentionally undercounting the number of kegs of booze. But then in 1875, the tax evasion grew out of control, and McDonald eventually confessed and was convicted, thereby tainting the presidency with corruption, just as Credit Mobilier had tainted Congress. As for their parties, Gilded Age Republicans favored high tariffs, low government spending, paying off national debt, and reducing the amount of paper money, or greenbacks, in circulation. Democrats opposed the tariffs and were often linked to New York bankers and financiers. In short, both parties were pro-business, but they were pro-different businesses. Despite that and the widespread corruption, some national reform legislation actually did get passed in the Gilded Age. The Civil Service Act of 1883, prompted by Garfield's assassination by a disgruntled office seeker, created a merit system for 10% of federal employees who were chosen by competitive examination rather than political favoritism. But this had an unintended effect. It made American politicians much more dependent on donations from big businesses rather than small donations from grateful political appointees. But, nice idea. And then in 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act forbade combinations and practices that restrained trade. But again, it was almost impossible to enforce this against the monopolies like U.S. Steel. More often, it was used against labor unions, which were seen to restrain trade in their radical lobbying for, health insurance and hard hats. But all in all, the National Congress was pretty dysfunctional at the end of the 19th century. Stop me if that sounds familiar. So state governments expanded their responsibility for public health and welfare. Cities invested in public works like transportation and gas and later electricity, and the movement to provide public education continued. Some northern states even passed laws limiting the workday to 8 hours. What is this, France? Is what courts would often say when striking those laws down. Reform legislation was less developed in the South, but they were busy rolling back Reconstruction and creating laws that limited the civil rights of African Americans, known as Jim Crow laws. In the West, farmers became politically motivated over the issue of freight rates. Wait, are we talking about railroads? Let's go to the thought bubble. In the 1870s, farmers formed the Grange movement to put pressure on state governments to establish fair railroad rates and warehouse charges. The biggest idea to come out of the Farmers Alliance was the sub-treasury plan. Under this plan, farmers would store grain in government warehouses and get low-rate government loans to buy seed and equipment using the stored grain as collateral. This would allow farmers to bypass the banks, who increasingly came to be be seen, along with the railroads, as the source of all the farmers' troubles. Eventually, these politically motivated farmers and their supporters grew into a political party, the People's Party, or Populists. In 1892, they held a convention in Omaha and put forth a remarkably reform-minded plan, particularly given that this was put forth in Omaha, which included the sub-treasury plan, which didn't exactly happen, although the deal farmers ended up with was probably better for them, government ownership of railroads, which sort of happened if you count Amtrak, graduated income tax, which did happen after the passage of the 16th Amendment, government control of the currency, which happened with the creation of the Federal Reserve System, recognition of the rights of laborers to form unions, which happened both at the state and federal level, and free coinage of silver to produce more money, which we'll get to in a second.